Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at data analysis expressions. My name is Mitchell Pearson, and if you like this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe so that whenever we drop another video or a new video on this channel, you get notified right away. Now, I've already done a video in the past on row context. In this video, I want to cover filter context, and once we build the fundamental kind of foundation around row context and filter context, then we can jump and we can dive into deeper conversations around DAX. And so that's a big announcement coming up, but we'll talk about that later. So before we do that, we do need to talk about filter context, and that is what this quick video is all about. So what is filter context? That's a good question. What is row context? Go back and take a look at the row context video. But in my demo right here, I have created a very simple measure, and that measure is total sales. Total sales is returning 29,358,000. And one thing I always ask my students is, what does that number represent? And in this data model, right here on this report page, there are currently no filters. There are no filters coming from slicers. There are no filters inside of the expression itself. There's none in the table. There's none in the filters pane. There are no filters that are being applied. So therefore, that 29,358,000 is the total sales from the sales table for all customers, all dates, all geographies, all sales territories, and all of these other tables that I have, because there are no filters that are currently being applied. Now let's jump over real quick and take a look at the actual measure. The measure here, and we'll zoom in a little bit, the measure here is the sum of internet sales amount. Again, I would ask you, how would you define this measure? Most people would define this measure as, this is the sum of sales amount this is the sum of the sales amount column from the sales table. And although that's kind of accurate, that's not completely true, and that's not completely accurate, right? Within Power BI and within the DAX language, if I were personally defining this measure, I would say that is the sum of sales amount. Let me just comment this out. This is the sum of sales amount from the sales table. So that part is correct, but there's more that I would add to that definition within the current filter context. You say, well, Mitchell, you're teaching us about filter context. I already know it's within the current filter context. Why would you have to define that? Because sometimes we are going to write measures that are within a modified filter context, right? We are modifying the filter context. But this one right here, the sum of sales amount, respects all active filters that are in the data model. Now, we've talked a little bit about filter context, but really, what is it, right? What is it? Well, filters are being applied through active relationships that you have defined in the model relationship tab, right? So if you either do that over here where you go to modeling, and under the modeling ribbon, if you open up your manage relationships, if we ever get there, there you go, manage relationships right here. Or if you were on the model tab over here, the model view, we have these active relationships that we have defined. And these active relationships, not this one, I actually purposefully added in an inactive relationship here, not this inactive relationship, but those active relationships are what define the filter context essentially. Because if no relationship exists, then there is no filter that can be applied between those two tables, not automatically or automagically, right? That doesn't happen. You could do that through DAX. You could write more complicated DAX where you have to do that, but it doesn't happen automatically. And so, for example, we see right here, we have the date, right? The date has a filter on order date where the date table filters down the sales table based on the order date. So if I take any column from my date table and we add that over here, anywhere in this report, it will now filter down that value. But the only reason it filters down that value is because it is the active relationship. So, the reason I'm focusing on that is because whenever I have problems with DAX, I'm helping other people out and my students are having problems, it usually comes down to the data model. And sometimes it's because there's a lot of relationships and that one relationship just wasn't propagating all the way through the tables correctly, or the relationship just didn't exist. So a lot of times the problems that we have with DAX come back to the active relationship, but that is where filter context really originates, right? In those active relationships. Now, if I come over to this table and I say, hey, I want to add in something like calendar year, and I drop that right there in that table. We're going to move that up right there. We'll see right here that that value is automatically being filtered. So unlike writing SQL, we don't have to come in here and now say, group by calendar year or anything like that. It automatically happens. And I love this functionality within Power BI. We all do. Now, why is it happening? That's the conversation we're having today. So that is one filter that's being applied. So one part of filter context are filters that are directly applied in the visual itself. Whether you're in a chart, whether you're in a table, whatever filters that are being applied in that visual, that is going to be one part of filter context. Let's talk about the different parts of filter context now. Another part of filter context is going to be filters that we are getting from our slicers that are in our report. And so you'll notice right here that if I click on Canada, for example, we might expect that clicking on Canada, or we should expect, would filter down that total sales measure. So I'll click on Canada, but nothing happens. And nothing happens because, well, I'm not quite sure. We got to think about that. Probably because of the relationship in the data model. So right before this video, I deleted that relationship just to prove a point. If the active relationship doesn't exist, then those filters are not part of the filter context, because the geography table, or sales territory table in this case, the sales territory table is unable to filter down the sales table. And so as a result, this measure, which derived from the sales table, is unfiltered, it's unaffected by that measure. And so if I go back over to the relationship view, the model view, it used to be called the relationship view many, many years ago. If I come over here and grab my sales territory key and I build that relationship back out, right? So I can get that to work. It's kind of, there we go. If I build that relationship back out, so now we have that filter there, and I come back over to the report, now my measure is being filtered by the sales territory table. And so any filters that you have inside of the visual itself, on the rows, on the columns, on the x-axis, whatever it is you're looking at, those are part of the filter context. Whatever filters that are coming from slicers or other visuals within your report, those are also going to be part of course, the filter context. Another thing to keep in mind is if you have any filters that are on the filters pane that are on this report or on this entire page or what have you, those will also be part of the filter. So all of that, as long as there are active relationships in your model, all of those different elements are part of filter context. Now there is one more thing that we need to talk about that is part of filter context that is not always immediately obvious, and that is inside of the measure itself. So if I go back over to my total sales, let me open this up right here, and I go back into my total sales measure. If you have applied filters within the measure itself, those would of course be part of the filter context. Now sometimes we're adding filters to the filter context inside of our measure. Sometimes we're completely overriding and changing it. This is filter context though. So all of those elements, and the reason they work is because of those active relationships that we have already defined. Now, the other thing I want to talk about with this is that at its core, row context and filter context, both of those, they make up what is known as evaluation context. Both of those are relatively simple to understand. But when we start building out more robust calculations that have a lot more stuff going on, and you have row context that's taking place, you have filter context that's in there, it's kind of hard to remember what is the conditions, what are the filters in which this situation, this table, this filter, whatever, is being evaluated. And that's where we really have to take it to the next level. Now, one more thing I want to point out, and then I'm done with this video, I promise, because this is just setting us up for some more advanced videos we want to do in the future. The total row, where most people start to realize that DAX is different than Excel, for example, is when they start to run into problems with where the total row does not match all of the rows of that column. Like, whoa, what is going on? I just want to point out here that the total row is evaluated within its own filter context. And so here's the thing. Ask yourself real quick, what is the filter context of the total row? The total row is not being filtered by any particular year, because the only filter on year is coming from the rows right here, and there isn't one. So the total row sees all years within our data model. It sees all, if we're looking at our tables, all customers, all dates, all geographies. It is, however, being filtered by France, which is coming from the sales territory table. So the total row is all of our sales for all years for France. Now in this example, the total row does happen to add up to the sum of all of those rows in that column, but that is not always the case. All right, there's a lot more that we can talk about with filter context, but I do not want to overcomplicate this video. So we're going to keep it simple and straightforward. And then in future videos, I'm going to come back with some examples, problem design, some solutions, some other things I want to talk through with you on why is this happening? How can we debug it? How can we validate it? So look forward to those videos. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.